The Stanley Cup has a very interesting and storied history, and today in this part 2 video, I'm going to go over the remaining teams' history in the Stanley Cup Finals. If you haven't seen part 1 yet, that covers the first 20 teams or so, be sure to watch that. Now let's get started with the Colorado Avalanche. The Avalanche may have the most efficient cup history in the league, 3 trips and 3 championships. Their very first season in Colorado in 95 and 96 ended in glory. The franchise had just relocated from Quebec City, and with Joe Sakic, Peter Forsberg, and newly acquired Patrick Roy in net, the Avs became instant contenders. They tore through the playoffs and swept the Florida Panthers, clinching with Krupp's triple overtime goal. Colorado became the first team in NHL history to win a championship in its debut season in a new city. In 2001, the Avs reached their peak. That team was built to win one thing, a cup for Ray Bourque, the legendary defenseman who never won anything in his 22-year career. With Sakic at his peak, Forsberg and Milan Hajduk providing offense, and while still dominant in net, Colorado defeated the defending champion Devils in 7 games. When Sakic received the cup and immediately handed it to Bourque before lifting it himself, it became one of the most iconic images in NHL history. After years of rebuilding, Colorado returned in 2022 with a new generation. Nathan MacKinnon, Mikko Rantanen, Gabriel Landeskog, and Cale Makar, who won the Conn Smythe. They led a powerhouse squad that dethroned the back-to-back champion Tampa Bay Lightning in 6 games. It was fast, dominant hockey, and a passing of the torch to the league's next great team. 3 appearances, 3 championships, and they still have one of the most talented rosters in the league, so that number could grow. Tampa Bay Lightning. The Lightning's journey is one of the most dramatic transformations in NHL history. In 2004, barely a decade after their founding, Tampa shocked the hockey world. Led by Vincent Lecavalier, Martin St. Louis, Brad Richards, Nikolai Khabibulin, they defeated the Calgary Flames in a hard-fought 7-game series. Fedotenko scored twice in Game 7, Richards won the Conn Smythe, and hockey in Florida had its first real validation. They didn't return until 2015 with a new core of Steven Stamkos, Victor Hedman, and goalie Andrei Vasilevsky. That team fell short against the Blackhawks dynasty in 6 games, but the seeds were planted. In 2019, they suffered one of the most embarrassing collapses ever, swept in the first round after tying the all-time wins record, but instead of crumbling, they regrouped. The redemption arc came fast. In 2020, inside the playoff bubble, the Tampa tore through the field and beat the Dallas Stars in 6 to win their second cup. In 2021, they faced the Islanders in the ECF once again and were on the brink of elimination in Game 6, but were able to force a Game 7. In Game 7, they won 1-0 with their only goal being a Yanni Gourde shorthanded goal. They would repeat taking down the Montreal Canadiens in 5 games, and Vasilevsky emerged as the best goalie in the world. And players like Nikita Kucherov and Brayden Point became household names. They nearly three-peated in 2022, but fell to Colorado in 6. Still, with 3 championships in less than 20 years, the Lightning cemented themselves as a very successful franchise. New Jersey Devils. For decades, the Devils were an afterthought. Then, in the mid-90s, they perfected the neutral zone trap and became one of the NHL's defining dynasties. Their first championship came in 95, with Martin Brodeur emerging as a superstar goalie, Scott Stevens and Scott Niedermayer patrolling the blue line, and Claude Lemieux scoring clutch goals. New Jersey stunned the heavily favored Red Wings with the 4-game sweep. It was a new era of hockey with stifling defense, elite goaltending, and just enough offense. In 2000, the Devils did it again. Patrick Elias and Jason Arnott provided the firepower, while Brodeur and Stevens shut down opponents. They beat the Dallas Stars in 6 games, with Arnott scoring the double OT Cup winner in Game 6. Their third championship came in 2003. Once again, Brodeur was brilliant. Jeff Friesen and Jamie Langenbrunner provided scoring, and the Devils outlasted the Mighty Ducks in 7 games. Brodeur recorded 7 shutouts that postseason, an NHL record that still stands. They nearly added a 4th in 2001, but lost to 7 to Colorado, and again in 2012 when they fell to the Kings in 6. Still, with 3 cups in less than a decade, the Devils established themselves as one of the great dynasties of the modern NHL. New York Islanders. Few dynasties in sports history are as impressive as the early 80s Islanders. Before that run, the Isles were just another expansion team trying to carve out an identity on Long Island. But under GM Bill Torrey and coach Al Arbour, they built a core that defined consistency. Mike Bossy, Brian Trottier, Dennis Potvin, Billy Smith, and young Clark Gillies. In 1980, the Islanders broke through, defeating the Philadelphia Flyers in overtime of Game 6. Bobby Nystrom's cup-clinching goal became the defining moment in franchise history. From there, they were unstoppable. They repeated in 1981, steamrolling the Minnesota North Stars. They won again in 1982, defeating the Vancouver Canucks, and in 83 they capped their dynasty by dismantling Wayne Gretzky's young Edmonton Oilers in 4 games. 4 straight cups, 19 consecutive playoff series wins, a record still untouched in professional sports. The Isles returned to the finals in 1984, but this time Gretzky and the Oilers turned the tables, starting their own dynasty. That loss ended the Islanders' reign, but their 4 championships in 4 years remain one of hockey's greatest dynasties, a standard even the modern Lightning and Blackhawks have not matched. New York Rangers. The first original 6 team on here, they found success early on, winning cups in 1928, 1933, and 1940. The 1940 victory became infamous because it was the last one they'd win for 54 years. The Rangers came close a few times. In 1972, with Brad Park and Jean Rattel, they reached the final but lost to Bobby Orr's Bruins. In 1979, they made it back but fell to the Dynasty Canadiens. The drought stretched on, testing the patience of the MSG faithful. Then came 94, with Mark Messier as captain, Brian Leetch on defense, Mike Richter in net, and Adam Graves scoring clutch goals. The Rangers put it all together. Messier famously guaranteed a win in Game 6 of the Eastern Conference Final against New Jersey, then delivered it with a hat trick. In the final, the Rangers faced the Vancouver Canucks in a 7-game war. Stéphane Matteau's double overtime winner in the conference final had already become legendary, but the cup clincher came in Game 7 at MSG. The Rangers won 3-2, Leetch won the Conn Smythe, and Messier lifted the cup to end 54 years of suffering. Madison Square Garden shook like never before. Since then, the Rangers have had flashes, another trip to the final in 2014 where they lost to the Kings, and a few deep playoff runs with Henrik Lundqvist and more recently Igor Shesterkin. But 94 remains their moment, cementing their place as one of hockey's most storied franchises. Pittsburg Penguins. The Penguins entered the league in 1967, and for their first 2 decades, they were more known for financial struggles and near relocation than hockey success. That all changed when they drafted Mario Lemieux in 1984. Super Mario single-handedly transformed the franchise, and when the Pens acquired Ron Francis and Paul Coffey and paired them with Jaromir Jagr, they were unstoppable. In 91, the Penguins reached their first Stanley Cup Final and beat the Minnesota North Stars in 5 games. Lemieux's highlight reel goal against Sean Chambers in Game 2 is still one of the most iconic in Cup history. The very next year they repeated, sweeping the Chicago Blackhawks with Lemieux again winning the Conn Smythe. 2 cups in 2 years cemented the Pens as an offensive juggernaut of the early 90s. After Lemieux retired, Pittsburgh fell on hard times, nearly going bankrupt in the early 2000s, but the lottery balls bounced their way, and in 2005 they drafted Sidney Crosby, who, along with Evgeny Malkin and Chris Letang, rebuilt the franchise. In 2008, Crosby's Penguins reached the final but lost to Detroit. In 2009, they got their revenge, defeating the Red Wings in a thrilling 7-game series. Crosby at 21 became the youngest captain in NHL history to lift the cup. Pens weren't done though. Under coach Mike Sullivan, they became the first team of the salary cap era to win back-to-back cups, in 2016 over the Sharks and 2017 over the Predators. 5 championships spanning the Lemieux era to the Crosby era make Pittsburgh one of hockey's model franchises of success. Edmonton Oilers. The Oilers' story is one of pure dominance in the 1980s. Joining the NHL in 1979 after the WHA merger, Edmonton immediately had a generational talent in Wayne Gretzky, surrounded by Mark Messier, Jari Kurri, Glenn Anderson, Paul Coffey, and goalie Grant Fuhr. They became one of the most explosive offensive teams ever. In 1983, they reached their first final, but the veteran Islanders swept them. That loss was the perfect lesson, and the end of the Islanders dynasty signaled the start of Edmonton's. The very next year, Gretzky and company crushed the competition, beating the Islanders in 5 to win their first Stanley Cup. They repeated in 85, dominated again in 87, and won one more time in 88, sweeping the Boston Bruins. Then came the trade. In 1988, Gretzky was shockingly dealt to the Los Angeles Kings, and many thought Edmonton's run was over. Instead, in 1990, the Oilers proved they were more than one man. Led by Messier, Craig McTavish, and Bill Ranford at net, Edmonton beat Boston again to win their 5th Stanley Cup in 7 years. Since then, the Oilers have been chasing these glory days. They came close in 2006, falling to Carolina in a heartbreaking 7-game final. With Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl now leading the way, Edmonton has been back to the Cup Finals the past 2 years, but has lost to the Panthers both times. Chicago Blackhawks. For most of their history, the Blackhawks were defined by long droughts between championships. They first tasted glory in 1934 with Charlie Gardiner in net leading them past the Red Wings. Just 4 years later, in 1938, they won again, but as the ultimate underdog. Chicago made the playoffs with a losing record and shocked everyone by beating Toronto for their second cup. Then came a long wait until 1961, when Bobby Hull, Stan Mikita, and Glenn Hall backstopped the Hawks to a win over the Detroit Red Wings. That championship was supposed to be the start of a dynasty, but instead it was the beginning of a drought. One that lasted nearly 50 years. The Blackhawks' rebirth came in the 2010s, and it was one of the greatest dynasties of the salary cap era. With Jonathan Toews as captain, a young star and taxicab villain in Patrick Kane, Duncan Keith and Brent Seabrook anchoring the blue line, and Corey Crawford in net, Chicago became unstoppable. In 2010, they defeated the Flyers to win their first cup in 49 years, with Patrick Kane's overtime winner sneaking past Michael Layden to end the drought. They won again in 2013, defeating Boston in 6 games with 2 goals in 17 seconds to clinch the cup. And in 2015, they cemented the dynasty by beating Tampa Bay in 6 for their 3rd championship in 6 years. 6 cups overall, 3 in 6 seasons, the Blackhawks went from a tortured franchise to one of the NHL's modern powerhouses. Though recent years have been marred by scandal and a painful rebuild that has still gotten them Connor Bedard, we'll have to see what they do. Boston Bruins. The Bruins' first cup came in 1929, led by goalie Tiny Thompson and legendary defenseman Eddie Shore. They added another in 39 with Roy Koenicher and Milt Schmidt driving the offense, and again in 1941 cementing their early era dominance. Then came a long drought. For nearly 30 years, Boston watched as rivals like Montreal piled up titles, but in 1970, the Bruins finally broke through again, and it came with one of the most iconic goals in hockey history. Bobby Orr flying through the air after scoring the overtime cup clincher against St. Louis became the sport's most enduring image. The Bruins repeated in 72, powered by Orr, Phil Esposito, and Jerry Shivers in net. After Orr's knees gave out, Boston went through more heartache. They reached the final in 74, 77, 78, and 88, but kept running into dynasties. The Flyers and Canadiens in the 70s, and Gretzky's Oilers in the 80s. The drought finally ended in 2011 when captain Zdeno Chara, Patrice Bergeron, and goalie Tim Thomas led the Bruins to a 7-game victory over the Canucks. Thomas's performance was legendary, and the Bruins ended a 39-year cup drought. Since then, Boston has remained a constant contender, reaching the finals in 2013 and 2019, losing both times, and then arguably having the best regular season of all time in 2023, only to lose in the first round after a 3-1 series lead. Detroit Red Wings. The Red Wings are the most successful American franchise in NHL history and one of the league's most iconic brands. Known as the Winged Wheel, the Detroit's hockey story is intertwined with the city's blue-collar identity. Their first golden era came in the 1940s and 50s when Mr. Hockey Gordie Howe, Ted Lindsay, and goalie Terry Sawchuk turned Detroit into the league's model franchise. Between 43 and 55, they appeared in the final 9 times. Howe became the face of hockey, combining skill, toughness, and longevity in a way no one else has ever matched. Also, a side note, I highly recommend Gordie Howe's book, Mr. Hockey, if you're at all interested in hockey history. I read this and I really enjoyed it. Anyway, then came the drought. From 55 to 97, Detroit didn't win a single championship. They became known as the Dead Wings, stuck in mediocrity despite loyal fans. That all changed in the 90s when Scotty Bowman took over behind the bench and a wave of international stars arrived. Steve Yzerman, Sergei Fedorov, Nicholas Lidstrom, and the Russian Five transformed the Red Wings into a dynasty. In 97, after 42 years of frustration, the Wings finally lifted the cup again, sweeping the Flyers. They repeated in 98, honoring injured teammate Vladimir Konstantinov by wheeling him onto the ice to celebrate with him. One of the most emotional moments in NHL history. They won again in 2002 with a Hall of Fame roster with Yzerman, Lidstrom, Fedorov, Dominik Hasek, Brendan Shanahan, Brett Hull, Luc Robitaille. Lidstrom became the first European captain to lift the cup in 2008 as Detroit beat Pittsburgh. They nearly went back-to-back but fell to Crosby's Penguins in 2009. 11 cups, 24 final appearances, and an unmatched legacy in US hockey. From Howe to Yzerman to Lidstrom, the Red Wings remain the standard of American excellence, even if they're still chasing their return to glory in the modern era. Toronto Maple Leafs. The Leafs are one of the NHL's most iconic franchises, and also one of its most tortured. Their glory years stretch back to the original 6 era. Toronto won its first cup in 1918 as the Toronto Arenas, and another in 1922 as the St. Patrick's. But the real dynasty years came after the franchise became the Maple Leafs in 1927. Under legendary coach Conn Smythe and later Punch Imlach, Toronto racked up championships at a steady clip. The 40s were the Leafs' first great dynasty, with Sil Apps, Turk Broda in net, and Teeter Kennedy. They won 5 cups in the decade, including a still unmatched feat. The only team to ever come back from a 3-0 deficit in the final, against Detroit in 1942. Their second golden age came in the 1960s with Dave Keon, Tim Horton, yes, Tim Horton of Tim Hortons, Johnny Boer, and Frank Mahovlich leading the way. The Leafs won 3 straight cups from 1962 to 1964 and added their most recent one in 1967. That victory over the rival Montreal Canadiens marked the end of the original 6 era and the beginning of Toronto's nightmare. Because here's the kicker, they haven't won since 67. In fact, they haven't even made it back to the final since then. They've had constant disappointment, Game 7 losses, especially to the Bruins. Generational talents like Matt Sundin, Doug Gilmour, and now Austin Matthews have carried the franchise at times, but none have been able to bring them back to the cup. 13 championships is second only to Montreal, but the Leafs drought is almost 60 years and counting. And finally, the Montreal Canadiens. No franchise in hockey, and arguably all of sports besides the New York Yankees, can match the Montreal Canadiens' history. The Habs are hockey royalty with a record 24 Stanley Cups. For generations, Montreal wasn't just the sports capital, it was the dynasty that defined entire eras. Their first cup came in 1916, before the NHL even officially existed. By 1940s, they were led by the Rocket Maurice Richard, whose scoring title and fiery personality turned him into a cultural hero for French Canadians. The Richard Riot in '55 was more than a hockey event, it was a turning point in Quebec's social history. In the 50s, Montreal was untouchable, winning 5 straight cups from 56 to 60 under coach Toe Blake, and with legends like Richard Beliveau, Doug Harvey, and goalie Jacques Plante, who revolutionized the position by wearing a mask. In the 1970s, they built another dynasty. Guy Lafleur, Ken Dryden, Larry Robinson, and Serge Savard powered the Habs to 4 straight cups from 76 to 79. 76-77 Canadiens are still considered one of the greatest teams in NHL history, losing just 8 games in regulation. Even in the 1980s, as dynasties shifted to the Islanders and Oilers, Montreal stayed relevant. In '93, Watt did it again. It remains the last championship by a Canadian team, and Watt's 10 straight overtime wins that spring remain one of the greatest goaltending feats ever. Since then, it's been a mix of hope and heartbreak. Montreal reached the final in 2021, arguably being the worst finals team of all time, and they made it as the Western team because of how it was set up that year, which would never happen in a normal year, so it was just an odd season. They would fall to Tampa Bay, and that's their most recent appearance. Still, the Canadiens' 24 cups are a mountain no other team has even come close to climbing. And that's all the team's Stanley Cup history. If you haven't seen part 1 yet, like I mentioned earlier in the video, be sure to check that out because I go over more teams in that. And if you made it to the end of the video, I'd really appreciate if you like and subscribe as it really helps me out. I've only made a few videos so far and I'm trying to make a lot more as the hockey season starts. Let me know your ideas for videos in the comments. Thank you for watching Hockey Domain, and I'll see you next time.